Hello, I'm here today to give you a list of books that I think might be able to help you get back into reading if you've stopped. We all fall into reading slumps, and sometimes they last like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and that's okay. You can get back into it. I stopped reading with like a voracious appetite when I was like 17, and I didn't really start again until like last year at 22 or 23. And for me personally, there were a few things that I found really difficult with beginning reading again, mainly being my attention span is shot. I could not fucking pay attention to a book for the life of me. I would read a few pages, put it down, pick up my fucking phone. It was horrible. The other huge thing for me was that I stopped reading as a teenager and then picked reading up again as an adult, if you could call me that. And I really had a hard time with that transition from like YA into adult novels. I couldn't read YA anymore, but I also found adult fiction really boring. So really, I guess that mostly boils down to books can be boring, especially if you have been trained to watch like tiny little videos over and over again on your phone and scroll endlessly. It's probably going to be pretty hard to read a book. So I've taken that into account when making this list. I have a few factors that have allowed me to choose the books for this. Those being short books or books with short chapters. I find those are the easiest to read 100%. I also think these books need to have accessible language and be like easy to approach. I'm not going to tell you to go read Crime and Punishment here. I think these books should be fast-paced or have some sort of momentum pushing you through and making you want to read it. Not all of these books have every single one of these factors, but they will at least have one or two. And I think the final factor here is me telling you about these books in a way that makes you want to read them. So I'm going to do my very best to do that today. I lit that candle behind me before I started and it fucking stinks. Like, it's a nice smell, but it's such a strong smell. I don't know if I'll be able to go the whole video with the candle. It's really stinky. Okay, let's get into it. Book 1 is Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. This book, first of all, is short-ish, but mostly has like really short chapters. Like chapters that are longer than 4 pages are like crazy in this book. It's typically 1, 2, 3 pages. So it's so easy to just keep going. This book is about a woman with an eating disorder and she falls in love with an Orthodox Jewish woman. And there's so much in here of like desire and wanting something so bad but feeling like there's so many rules and you can't have it, both with like the Orthodox Jewish faith and with her eating disorder, and it like parallels the two things so beautifully. This is like juicy and like delicious and you cannot put it down or get enough of it. The stakes feel so high and it's so very tense the whole time, and that's largely due to Broder's like very skilled writing style. She is so good at making something as simple as getting a new flavor of frozen yogurt feel like the most thrilling thing you've ever read. The whole time I was reading this book, my heart was pounding, and not because it's scary. It's just like so tense and you love the characters and you love the story so much, and everything that happens feels like so crazy. Like it really gets you into the story and makes you feel like you're a part of it and like you really care about what's going to happen. I think Milk Fed is so real and so raw and vulnerable and unflinching and also funny, and I don't typically like a funny book. That's really subjective. Like, for a funny book to work, your humor has to mesh perfectly with the author's, and I just don't think that that is something that is a problem with Melissa Broder's work. I think those real and unflinching qualities make her work funny. Like, she just has such a realistic view of the world, and she approaches it in a way that is like kind of dark, but also with this sense of humor that is just so enjoyable. I think everyone would enjoy this book. Except if you're a prude, maybe. It's not like so overly sexual. I just think people have really high standards for like what kind of sexuality lesbians are allowed to have in media. So you might see complaints that this is too raunchy. They're insane, okay? Ignore that. This book is so good, and it's like, the raunchiness is perfect, and I don't like erotic books. And if you read Milk Fed and you like it, I think you should also read Death Valley by Melissa Broder. It has those same short chapters and that really like quickly paced plot, and it's just so good. But start with Milk Fed, I think. The next book I have to recommend for you is A Little Luck by Claudia Piñeiro. This is translated from Spanish, and it follows a woman who's dealing with the aftermath of this shocking and horrific incident that pushes her out of her community for like decades. And she's now come back to this community and has to deal with the guilt and the blame and everything that has come with abandoning her family here. This book is not very long, and it has a lot of momentum because you want to know both what happened in the past, what this incident was, and what's happening in the present, how everything's going to turn out. There's this fantastic part in the beginning where after each chapter, it gives you a little bit more of the story using this repetition, and I'm not going to get into it further because I don't want to spoil these books for you. I want you to go read them, and you should go read this. It's so good. It was like there were parts that were making me gasp out loud while reading this. Another reason I think this book is a good way to get you back into reading is because it is very clever and uses metaphors in a really skillful way without being super hard to grasp. So you get it and it makes you feel smart for getting it. It's so insightful on themes of gender and motherhood, and I think that it takes you as the reader on this journey with the main character where it can really like make you interrogate your own biases and like your thoughts about her. I feel like I really changed how I thought about her and her actions in the end versus how I did in the beginning. Again, if you read this and like it, I think you should explore Piñeiro's other work. I've also read Elena Knows by her, and I thought that it was similarly really well done. It's raw and realistic in its characterization, but it also has things that you want to find out with the plot. I think her work does a really good job of being like these beautiful, intimate character portraits while also being plot heavy at the same time. Like she does it all. And she does it all so well. Then we have Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, which is a book that I've talked about on this channel ad nauseum, and I'm not going to stop. I really, really enjoyed this book, and I think most people would. And it's so short, like you just can't put it down. You'll read it in a sitting. Ghost Wall follows this teenage girl who goes with her parents on this reenactment camping trip of Iron Age Britons. Her dad is this like dickhead history buff, and he is a very controlling and domineering man who wants everything to be absolutely perfect, and he is physically abusive to his daughter, and he takes out his frustrations on her. It's this really intense and frightening story of patriarchal abuse, and the stakes feel so high, and it feels so intense, but also like it's a very not necessarily like super realistic, like who really goes on a reenactment camping trip of Iron Age Britons, but it's not like magical or like really intense. It's just like real people, like real characters in a scenario, and the characters are so real you can imagine how they'll react to things, which makes you want to keep going and seeing what will happen. Moss does such a fantastic job of making this absolutely unforgettable character of the father who's like so obsessive, and like you just know how he's reached all these conclusions and why he thinks the way he does, and he's so wrong about it, but it's like so obvious why he's like that. Like he is just an abusive, shitty guy who wants control over women and minorities, and he has become obsessed with history because he thinks that if he were an Iron Age Briton, he would have that control that he so desperately craves. And there's so much tension with just like the tiniest little things going wrong. And like I said, you really feel like you know how the characters will react. So like the tiniest little thing is a little bit inaccurate, and you're like, oh my God, this dad is gonna blow the fuck up. Like he's gonna go crazy about this. And then he does. Ghostwall also has a very beautiful exploration of like friendship between women and how that can kind of pull you out of an abusive situation. The end made me cry. It's such a good book. I'm not gonna say anymore. I'm not gonna tell you what happens at the end, but like it's so tense, and then like it's still tense, but the tension kind of resolves, and it's just so good. It's just so good. Go read Ghost Wall. It's like less than 200 pages. The next book I have to recommend you is Hurricane Girl by Marcy Dermansky. This is a book that I do not see enough people talking about because I thought it was so fantastic. It follows a woman recovering from a brain injury after this horrific act of violence against her. I think it does such a good job of getting inside the head of someone with a brain injury. Like some things just feel so alien reading her thinking about them. Like she has this super interesting push-pull between logic and emotion where she'll feel something and then she'll like go through it very logically and kind of like get rid of the feeling. Just such fascinating characterization and writing. It's so compulsive, and I think that the pace here can kind of waver, not in a way that's an issue. It's just like thinking back on it, I can see that the beginning it's like quite fast, and then it's a little bit slower in the middle, and then a little bit fast again, and then a little bit slow, and then really fast at the end. But while you're reading it, you never feel like it's slow. It's just compulsive all all the way through because being inside the head of this brain damaged character is so interesting that you want to know how she'll react to every little thing, even things with very low stakes. There's also a kind of terrifying aspect to this if you are someone like me who has this deep-seated fear of traumatic brain injuries and that happening to you or people that you love. It is kind of horrific because of that, and there are parts of this that are just plain simply horrific, nothing to do with the TBI. But more than anything, it's just this super interesting look inside her head and how she deals with things and reacts to things with this injured brain. It's just fantastic. Up next is Assembly by Natasha Brown. This is a very short little novella. It has very few words on the page. You will get through it very quickly, and it will give you a lot to think about in that short time. This is a super clever and thoughtful portrait of a Black woman living in England, I think, and she is experiencing a health crisis, and it's just kind of her dealing with her emotions about like the colonial racist society that she lives in and how that impacts the way she feels about her body in illness. It has this perspective that I had never really considered before, and I don't want to spoil the conclusions that she comes to, but it's just like so interesting to think about and something that I had honestly never considered, and I don't think I ever would have without reading this book. Like the intersection between living in this oppressive society and illness. Me trying to describe it right now without spoiling it is making me sound really fucking dumb because obviously I've thought about illness and disability and depression before. I can't, like, I'm not going to tell you what happens, and I'm not going to tell you what she ends up thinking about, but it was very interesting, okay? I promise you, I'm not as dumb as I sound right now. I'm a little dumb. Next up on this list is Malagash by Joey Comeau. This is a tiny little book. Again, very short chapters, very few words on the page. You'll get through it super quickly and you will fall in love with these characters. It follows this family, but particularly the eldest sister, who's like 13, 14, as their father dies from cancer. As he's dying, she is recording everything that he says, transcribing it, and turning it into a computer virus so that he can live on as a virus in everyone's computers, which sounds sort of magical realism-y, and I thought it was when I picked it up, and it wasn't, but I was not disappointed by that because I thought this book was just gorgeous. This really is about the characters dealing with the death of their father, and every single character in this is so complex and nuanced and well developed and lovable despite all of their flaws. You cannot help but really feel attached to every single one of them and to the relationship dynamics that kind of evolve while they are losing their father. This book is very heartfelt and emotional and vulnerable without being too like overly earnest or corny with that. Malagash made me feel very emotional, and I think it's a beautiful and very well done portrait of this family losing a man they love. And grief is one of my favorite themes in books. I love a book that can make you feel something, and that is why I'm going to recommend This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno again. I can't stop. I love this book. This is truly one of my favorite books of all time. I only have positive things to say about it. Something I will say is that everything else I've talked about so far has been quite neutral in terms of genre. I think that they have all been likable to people who read kind of any sort of book. This does turn into cosmic horror, which is not everyone's cup of tea. 100%. I think everyone will like the first 2/3 of this book. The last little bit is definitely an acquired taste. So know that. This Thing Between Us follows Tiago after his wife Vera has died in an accident, and he is being haunted. The sort of tagline of this book, and what drew me into it, because I kind of love weird little things like this, is that he is being haunted by his Alexa. This book is so much more than that, but it is kind of a fun draw. This is such a perfect portrayal of the anger of grief. It will make you so mad and so upset. It'll make you cry. It will make you gasp. There are so many parts of this book that I still think about a year after reading it. I also love this structure for a book about grief, especially like a horror book about grief. This is written as Tiago writing a letter to Vera, who has died. Oh my God, there could not be a better way to portray it. It is perfect. I remember when I first read this, like sitting on the kitchen counter, unable to put it down while I was trying to like make food. I was burning the food. I was so distracted by this. I read it as quickly as I could have possibly read it. It is just amazing. I just only have good things to say about that, which makes this segment really boring because all I can say, I can just keep repeating, it's so good. Yeah, I just don't really want to give anything away. I do want to tell you, if you like horror, I think that you should read it, even if you're unsure about the cosmic horror or you will love the rest of it, and the rest of it will absolutely make up for the kind of abstract ending. There are so many twists and turns, and like he builds this atmosphere perfectly. I don't know if this necessarily fits the theme. I do think it's very, very, very fast paced. It doesn't have short chapters. It's a pretty short book. I just want to recommend this as often as I possibly can because I love it so much. It's smoky in here. Is it visibly smoky on the camera because I lit that incense? I thought it would make a nice vibe, but now I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like there's carbon monoxide in here. Up next we have Big Swiss, which is a book I am sure you have been recommended many times, and I think that it's popular for a very good reason. I don't think this book is overhyped at all. Big Swiss follows a woman named Greta who transcribes sex therapy sessions, and she becomes obsessed with this woman whose voice she's heard on these therapy sessions, who has like a very strange and strict and rigid worldview. And she ends up meeting this woman who she's nicknamed Big Swiss and creating a different persona for herself so that she can't be traced back as being like the transcriber for these therapy sessions. So there's so much tension there with like, is she gonna get found out? Like, she's using a different name and she's so stupid about it because they're in this like small town and people keep coming up to her and calling her by her real name. This is like so juicy because you are reading from Greta's perspective, so you're listening in on like people's very private, intimate therapy sessions. It feels like the biggest dose of gossip you've ever received in your life. And I love how this book constructs Greta as a sort of unreliable narrator because of Big Swiss's therapy sessions, where she describes things in a very different way than Greta does. I cannot be 100% sure, but I remember this having very short chapters, but I totally could be talking out of my ass. I read it months ago. I do not own it. It's at the library. I couldn't actually tell you if that's true or not. I think it is, though. I do know that this book was unputdownable. I read it and I could not stop reading it. The characters are like so singular and quirky and weird and unique, but not in a way that is like cringe to read about. It feels very self-aware in the way that it makes these characters just like so ridiculous. And also some crazy things happen in this book, but mainly you're just like really propelled forward by wanting to know what's going to happen to these characters who are just so fucking weird. Next on my list is One's Company by Ashley Hutton. This book follows a kind of deranged woman's descent into madness after she wins the lottery and starts reconstructing the set of her favorite TV show on this plot of land up in the mountains. This is a very short book and a very easy to read book, and it is so compulsive because you just want to know what is happening to her. Like, her brain is so fucking weird, and it's very, very, very detail focused, but it does it in a way that maintains your interest throughout, which I think is like really skilled. This character is beyond obsessive, and it makes you feel obsessive. You want everything to be perfect down to the last detail in the same way that she does. In this very short, very tightly packed book, crazy shit happens. The ending is insane. I'm not going to tell you anything more, but it's crazy, and it's like so fun, but also kind of like heartfelt and very vulnerable. I loved the narrator's really like strange, but also very much understandable worldview and how she like constructs other people in her head. She has experienced an extremely traumatic event that you don't get all the details of right away, and it has really messed with her brain, but she also kind of had a messed up brain to begin with, and she can be very like mean and cruel because of her obsessiveness, and people in her life still like love her anyway. It's very beautiful in that sense, while also being just like so fucking weird the whole time. It's such a strange book. Like, what a concept, and so well done. The next book I have is The Guest by Emma Cline. This follows a woman who gets kicked out of her boyfriend's house, and she kind of floats around this like rich area trying to find places to crash so that she can go to her boyfriend's party and like make up this argument that she's had with him. This book will stress you the fuck out. It is very tense in the fact that like you want to know if she's going to make it, but also you kind of want her to fail, but you really want the story to keep going at the same time. And she just keeps messing things up, but then keeps getting out of it somehow. Like, I think truly through being a beautiful young woman, she's able to find these places to stay and these parties to crash at, and then she just like ruins it because she's kind of really messed up. But through the whole book, you're like, where is she gonna go next? What is she gonna do? Now she's screwed, and then she's not screwed, and then now she's screwed, and it just keeps going like that and keeps building up to this ending that is questionable, and that's all I'm gonna say about it because I don't want to ruin your experience of it. I don't know how I feel about the ending. I gave this book to my sister, and she said that she read it like basically just in one night. She couldn't put it down. It's very, very, very compulsive. And the journey she goes on is also just like kind of fun. There's not a huge amount of character development here. I think she just has been cemented to be the way that she is, but that is still very interesting to read about. Okay, for the last section of this, I'm gonna pivot just a little bit because I think that there are some people out there who the books that I've talked about being fast and short and easy to read are not exactly what you're looking for when you're trying to find a way to get back into reading. And what you're looking for is an accomplishment. So now I'm going to recommend 4 books, 3 of which are very, very, very long, and 2 of which are quite literary. So both will make you feel like you have done something. And, you know, reading is just entertainment and it's just a hobby, and you don't need to put this like morality on it or make it feel like something that's very productive necessarily, but if that helps you get back into it, that helps you get back into it. Reading a very long book is a very different experience than reading a short book. It is more difficult and it can be kind of grating and feel through a lot of it less like you're making a lot of progress really quickly, but then at the end of it, it's very hard to forget the atmosphere and the characters that you have been immersed in for so long. And that was my experience with the 2 very long horror books that I have read recently, which were The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis and Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. The Shards is very much like a thriller type of book, but it's done so perfectly that it can't compare to other like very genre fiction thriller books. This follows a group of teenagers, and it mainly follows Bret, named after the author, his self-insert, as the people around him are being killed by this serial killer in LA in the 80s. There's so much like mystery and drama in this book that it really leaves you guessing at what's happening and wanting to make it to the end. This was like one of the first very, very long books that I have read recently, and I couldn't stop reading it. Even though I typically read quite short books, I picked it up and I was like, I'm never gonna get through this. And then I couldn't put it down, even though it hurt my wrists because it's like 700 fucking pages. Another thing that really keeps you going through this story is that the main character is a closeted teenager, and he is so paranoid that everyone around him knows. And there are so many very tense conversations in this book where people are saying almost what they're trying to say. And like Bret is always reading into it as people like saying, I know you're gay, but then no one ever says anything outright. So it's so stressful trying to like interpret what's happening, especially through the perspective of this very, very paranoid character. The Shards does gore in a way I have never seen. Typically when I read gore, I'm like, ew. You know, oh, that's yucky. I don't like that. The Shards made me feel sick to my fucking stomach. The Shards like genuinely was one of the most disturbing books I have ever read because of the like horrific gore at the end. Oh my god. Like I can't even talk about it. I feel sick just thinking about it. I finished that book with tears in my eyes and bile in my throat. The other book I listened to on audiobook, it was 27 hours long, and that was Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez. This is so much, I can't even describe what happens in it. There are so many characters and so many plot lines. It's like a series of novellas more than anything. It's a very long book with like 5 chapters, and it follows this kind of like cultish family and all the horrible things that happen to them because of their communications with like other planes of existence. Unfortunately, I am not sticking with my goal of explaining things to you in ways that will make you want to read them, because Our Share of Night is so big and ambitious. I cannot pin down exactly what the plot is, and so I can't really make you want to read it. I think that you should, though. I think that you will find it worth your time, especially if you listen to it on audiobook. Oh my god, the way that she narrates this audiobook is so fucking intense. I was freaked the fuck out. There's one character who has like a facial deformity, and the way that she speaks this character's lines is crazy. So fucking well done. Okay, the next book that I'm recommending for you is a book that I didn't actually love my experience of reading, but I'm still gonna put it on this list, and that is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. This will make you feel like you have read something really important, because after you finish Jane Eyre, you will be seeing its influences fucking everywhere. This is like a gothic romance following Jane Eyre, who goes to work at this mansion and she falls in love with this man, and so much more happens in it. And it is an old book, but I'm still not gonna spoil it because I think it's worth reading, and I think that it's a more fun experience reading it if you don't know what happens in it. If you want to read a long classic to feel accomplished, this is probably the way to go because the plot is so quick and it is digestible enough. Though it is from the 1800s, so the language is super archaic and can be really dense and ridiculous. I still think that you will find a lot of merit in this book. Obviously, like, there's a reason it's a classic and there's a reason it's so influential. I think this is a really good book to read if you're interested in reading more gothic literature or horror because of how influential it is. Everything that you read after this, you will see little sprinkles of Jane Eyre in. Finally, I have a shorter book that is like kind of a classic but a little bit more modern than 1800s, and that is Jazz by Toni Morrison. I think that you could truly read any of Toni Morrison's works. This was what I picked because I felt like I read this very quickly and I really wanted to know what was happening. Jazz follows this large cast of characters all around this like central act of violence that happens. It gives you such intimate and deep portraits of everyone. That's what Toni Morrison does best, and this book does it perfectly. I think you'll want to keep reading this book because you'll want to know why, and I also think that her writing will captivate you. Any book, like I said, that you read by Toni Morrison will be fantastic. I just like, her writing is unlike anything else I've ever read, and I will happily pick up anything she's ever written, and Jazz is no exception. I also think Sula is a great piece of work. Of the Bluest Eye, obviously one of her most famous pieces of work, and Beloved are all just fantastic books that you will read and you will enjoy, and you will feel very literary after you read them. The candle has filled my room with smoke, and I feel like I'm going to pass out. So I'm going to go. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.